which leads us to agency contracts. And as I've stated multiple times, folks, you have to realize that there are going to be questions on contracts in general. And no, not all contracts have to do with real estate. There's going to be questions on real estate contracts in general. And then there's going to be exceptionally specific ones on a specific listing agreement, a specific sales contract, a specific something or another. And you've got to be able to discern between all of these different things. And so in this section, we're going to get into all the different contract discussions, the agency contract discussions. We're going to do commission calculations. We're also going to talk about some other really big pieces of laws or legislation that dictate how we operate as real estate brokers, because this is kind of the best place to put it. So let's start with how you earn a fee as a listing agent, folks. How you earn a fee as a listing agent. Your understanding is probably that we get paid as a listing agent when we sell the seller's house. But what if I told you that there's times that we have earned a fee even if we did not sell the seller's house? The general speak that comes with you have earned a commission as a listing agent is, number one, you have to have an active and current license in good standing to be able to do real estate brokerage legally. You have to have a valid listing contract, aka an employment agreement that says they hired you and they owe you money. And then ultimately what it comes down to, the biggest trigger, the biggest goal to have earned a fee as a listing agent is procuring a ready, willing, and able buyer on terms acceptable to the seller. Procuring a ready, willing, and able buyer at terms acceptable to the seller. And you're going to see this actual language in our agreement in just a second, at least one of the most common ones that we utilize. And so there are times, folks, that we as real estate brokers maybe do a commission/compensation even if the property doesn't close. Not common, but definitely something you have to understand. Because ultimately the trigger is we procured a ready, willing, and able buyer at terms acceptable to the seller. And so in theory, if we've done that, but then the seller changes their mind and refuses to sell, arguably we've still done our job. We're still due a commission. Now, before I get into the more in-depth conversations about this, this is where I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of a tangent that will hopefully help you understand some things and hopefully not confuse you. Folks, when we're dealing with compensation, I told you the way that it's always typically happened, at least more often than not, even though it's always been negotiable, right? The biggest thing is we've always got to talk about it being negotiable. There's no such, like, we're not allowed to price fix. We're not allowed to set prices, anything like that. But the way that it's always kind of worked more often than not is when a listing agent works with a seller, we will tell the seller what we expect to be paid as the listing firm. And then what we typically do is we will turn around and we will say, okay, of this amount that we're charging you, we're going to take a portion of this and offer it to a cooperating buyer's agent or a cooperating seller sub-agent or both. And so in other words, we're charging you a fee, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, and then we're taking part of our fee and we're sharing it with the buyer's agent or the seller sub-agent, as long as the seller's okay with that. And what used to happen, listen carefully here, is we would put this offer of compensation in the MLS, which stands for the Multiple Listing Service. And that is how we always knew what compensation was being offered to us as a buyer's agent and whether or not we could act as a seller sub-agent. Here's the word of caution, folks. The NAR stuff that I'm telling you not to focus on your test really rolled out in August of this year, and it's technically not even finalized. Has it changed the way we do things in the real world? Yes. But I promise you, nobody at the commission has rewritten any test questions over it, because it's not even confirmed yet. So what I'm saying is, If you get a test question, and I know there's one on my test that I didn't get rid of because it's not finalized yet. If you get a test question that says, oh, you would look in the MLS to see what offer of compensation was being made to a seller subagent, that's a true statement for the sake of your test. Because no test questions have been rewritten for this NAR stuff. Everybody with me here? Don't think that, like you're going to answer questions and it's like, oh no, with the new settlement thing. Nothing about the settlement is on your test. So if your test question says there's an offer of compensation in the MLS, it's not lying to you. It's just no test questions can be rewritten yet because we don't know this is going to be permanent. We don't know any of that. So you just got to be very careful. Nowadays, we use what we call cooperating compensation agreements, for lack of a better way of putting it. So the only thing that's really changed is instead of having this place to go look, we would just call somebody. Case in point, folks, I have a listing right now in North Raleigh, and another agent showed it last night, and she texted me yesterday evening while I was teaching you, and she said, hey, Seth, are you offering any compensation for buyer's agents on your listing? And I just had to text her back and answer, yeah, and tell her what it was. Because there is no blanketed place for them to find it anymore. So now we're just communicating directly on it. That's one of the biggest changes. But don't get scared about like MLS test questions. No questions have been rewritten since this crap rolled out in August. So the ways that we share commissions, folks, of course, if we charge the seller this fixed amount, we say of that, we may share some with a cooperating buyer's agent or seller subagent. But if there's not a cooperating agent, the firm's just going to keep all of it. If it's an in-house transaction and it's dual agency, the firm will keep the full percentage and we'll just split it between licensees within the firm. So it could be split all in the firm. It could be a co-brokered sale. It could be paying out partial referral fees for people who have referred business in. There's a lot of different ways that we could potentially share these commissions or compensations. Now, when we're dealing with buyer's agents, folks, understand the different dynamic, okay? We're talking about listing agents are typically the ones that charge it and then would offer the shared amount. When we're dealing with buyer's agents, as I just stated, the most common thing is the listing firm and or seller offering the buyer's agent some type of compensation. However, if they're not being offered compensation by the seller or the listing firm, it is possible and can happen and does sometimes happen where the buyer's agent pays, where the buyer pays the buyer's agent's compensation directly. It happens. Now we'll talk about the retainer fee and the success fee in just a second. I've just got to, I like to do things in a certain order here because I think it makes it stick a little bit better. So let me skip forward here for a second. Okay, I'm going to... No. Because I want to start with the listing agreement. And then I'll backtrack here for a second. Folks, I've already told you that there are some times we're asking questions about exceptionally specific contracts. Case in point, right here on my screen, these are 3 different types of listing agreements. And they're all testable. And they all work slightly differently. Now let me explain something else to help you understand these things. Folks, what does the word exclusive mean? One? One and one? Only one? Only? Yeah. All that's true. Specific to one party, yeah. Folks, we use the word exclusive in 2 different contexts. The word means the same thing, but there's 2 different contexts, okay? When we say exclusive buyer agency, on a buyer agency agreement. So for example, an exclusive buyer agency agreement. That word exclusive on the buyer agency agreement. Exclusive buyer agency agreement. That word exclusive means them to us. Okay, if you're signing an exclusive agreement, that means they can't have another buyer agent. Does that make sense, everybody? Exclusive buyer agency agreement. You can't have another buyer agent. You are exclusive to me. I'm your buyer agent, right? You remember that movie with like the Somalian pirate? I'm the captain now, right? I'm your buyer's agent. You look at him, you make eye contact. I'm your buyer's agent. I'm the captain now. So an exclusive buyer's agency agreement, that word exclusive means them to us. But if I say exclusive buyer agency, that means us to them. Because remember when we talked about single agency, right? If I say buyer agency, I told you the only person we care about is the buyer and nobody else. You agree? We talked about this yesterday. Nod and say yes, you agree. Yeah. Buyer agency means we only care about the buyer. The seller is either represented by another firm or not represented. We know we don't care. So you see the different context. If I say exclusive buyer agency, that's us to them. And if I say an exclusive buyer agency agreement, that's them to us. But folks, let's talk about dual agency for a second. Okay, I want you to think about this. Savannah calls me up and she wants to buy a house. And so Savannah and I, and don't panic because I know I'm talking about listing agreements, but I think it's easier to explain this with a buyer agency agreement. Savannah calls me up. I work for ABC Realty and she wants to buy a property. So we sign an exclusive buyer, I'm not going to spell it out, exclusive buyer agency agreement. And so that exclusive buyer agency agreement is telling Savannah, I'm your buyer's agent and you can't have another one. So now it's exclusive. If she was to go and try to work with another buyer's agent, we got a problem because she's in breach of our agreement. But while I am starting off my relationship with Savannah as exclusive to her, what you're going to find when we look at these agency agreements is Savannah and I are going to have a conversation about dual agency and whether or not dual agency could and can arise. Folks, when would Savannah and I turn from an exclusive relationship to a dual agency relationship? What would trigger it no longer being exclusive between Savannah and I? With a property listed by the firm. There you go, Brad. Folks, every agency agreement starts off as exclusive. So right then and there, when Savannah and I sign this buyer agency agreement, I'm exclusive to her. She's exclusive to me. She can't have another agent. Okay, that's what that agreement states. And I'm starting off looking out for Savannah and Savannah only. And so if I take her to see listings by XYZ, we're still exclusive. If I take her to see Cole Banker listings, we're still exclusive. If I take her to see Keller Williams listings, we're still exclusive. But the second Savannah wants to go see a listing by ABC, we're not exclusive anymore because really and truthfully, who is the agent? ABC. And so now it's not exclusive because guess what? Now we're saying ABC cares about Savannah and let's put Beverly as the seller. ABC cares about Beverly, the seller. Folks, I don't know if you know this, but the last time I checked, exclusive doesn't involve three people. You see what I'm saying? If you don't believe me, try bringing home a third person to your significant other and see what happens. Okay, you're going to be sleeping on the couch or dead, one of the two. Exclusive is not three people. Everybody with me? And so all agency agreements start off with us being exclusive to them. But if they authorize dual agency, we can stop being exclusive. We're allowed to bring in this third person. They gave us permission if they authorize dual agency. But even though if Savannah says this is okay, she still can't bring in anybody else. She's still exclusive to me. I'm just no longer exclusive to her. Is everybody tracking with me here? Because the only agent she can have is ABC Realty. But because she authorized dual, ABC can represent the buyer and the seller. So you got the menage a trois of the real estate world. The firm, the buyer, the seller. Always get permission before you do this, right? That's why dual agency needs informed and written consent. Okay? It's not, they said it was fine when they were drunk. It's not the same thing. Some life advice, by the way, folks. Just making sure y'all are paying attention. Promise we're still talking about agency. So, same thing is true. Okay, now that I've explained it with buyer agency, look at this list here. Folks, the very first one on this list is an open listing agreement. Well, as you see, it's very useful to equate this to relationships. What is an open relationship?
You can be with anybody.
You can be with anybody. I mean, there might be some rules, okay? Anybody's kind of a stretch, okay? There might be, yes, several, right? There's more than one person. Open means it's not just two, okay? There's other people involved. And so let me explain these in a nutshell, folks. An open listing agreement is one where a seller will employ multiple brokerage firms. And every single one of those brokerage firms is going to attempt to bring the seller a buyer. And so the open piece is there's multiple firms. Everybody's understanding that. But there's a couple other key pieces here. The seller would only be willing to compensate the person who actually brings them a buyer. Now, folks, listen, okay? Y'all got to be mature about this because I'm going to use some analogies here, and I'm going to use very vague language, and if it turns weird in your head, that's a you thing, not a me thing, okay? But it's going to help you understand this. That's a you thing, not a me thing, if it gets weird. Let's just say that one more time. I want you to imagine that you have this open relationship, and you've got this problem in this relationship. Now, we're talking about sellers, so the problem is I need a buyer. And we can all agree that sometimes people need things in a relationship. And so what you basically say is, hey, if you take care of my problem, I'll take care of you. From an agency point of view, what we mean is you bring me a buyer and I will pay you. But if you don't bring me a buyer, if you don't take care of my problem, I'm not going to pay you. Furthermore, folks, this is where, don't let it get weird. If it gets weird, this is on you. In a relationship, sometimes your problem is not taken care of. And so sometimes you just have to take care of your own problem, whatever that is. And if you take care of your own problem, you're not taking care of anybody else. And that's how this works. So what the seller states is, if you bring me a buyer, I will pay you. And you are the only one getting paid. Nobody else is getting nothing. But understand that if I find my own buyer and take care of it myself, I'm not paying any of you. You can all go kick rocks. Does everybody understand what I'm saying here? That's an open listing agreement. Multiple firms are employed to try to find a buyer. Only the one who actually finds a buyer would be entitled to compensation. And if the seller does a for sale by owner, because they're allowed to still do that, find their own buyer. If they find their own buyer, they're not paying any brokers anything, and they say, kick rocks. Go away. I took care of my own problem. Beverly says, how common are those? Not common at all in North Carolina. They are sometimes semi-common in high-end markets like New York condominiums and things like that, just because of the competitive nature, but not common in North Carolina at all. Okay. Well, open you get. Here's the first one with the word exclusive. Yet again, that means just the two of us, right? And so that word exclusive tells us that the seller has hired one firm and one firm only. So there's that exclusive piece. There's not multiple brokerages. This is not an open relationship. We've got this relationship. It's the seller, it's the brokerage firm. And the brokerage firm is going to list the property and market it for sale. And they're going to attempt to find a buyer. And they're the only firm trying to find them a buyer. And understand that if any of the broker's marketing efforts brings a buyer, the broker or brokers, because they're typically advertising it in the MLS, are going to be entitled to compensation. But folks, let's use that same analogy, okay? Even in an exclusive relationship, sometimes your partner doesn't take care of the problem you need taken care of. And so sometimes you can just take care of it yourself. And that's what happens in this exclusive agency listing agreement. Listen, don't make it weird, Jack. And so what we're basically stating is the seller has the right to try to find their own buyer. And if they find their own buyer, the broker gets nothing. But if it's the broker who finds the buyer, the broker is getting paid. Is everybody with me? You're going to really love the comparison for the last one. So you've got to be very careful because you see the word exclusive in both of these, and students really get confused because they both say exclusive. The last one is the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. And so yet again, they've hired one brokerage firm to market the property and try to find a buyer. And if any of the broker's efforts result in a buyer, yet again, the brokers are getting paid. But here's the kicker, folks. Let's say that the broker doesn't find the buyer. Let's say that the seller, yet again, takes care of their own problem themselves and they find their own buyer. The broker basically says, "You're welcome," and they still get paid. In other words, we take credit for it, even if we didn't do it, and we still get paid. You see the difference there? In the exclusive agency listing agreement, the seller could sell it themselves and pay nobody. But in the exclusive right to sell listing agreement, it does not matter where this buyer came from, the broker gets paid. So in other words, if the seller goes to church and tells their church that their house is for sale, and somebody that the broker has never met, the pastor, right, says, "Well, I want to buy your house." It was directly from the seller's efforts that the house is now being sold, not the broker's, but the broker still gets paid. What you got, Raphael?
Just a question. Let's say in this case that you mentioned, okay, the seller found the buyer without your help. Okay. At what point, let's say the buyer doesn't want to pay you commission. The seller or the buyer, they don't want to pay, the seller doesn't want you to get commission because you didn't find it. Can they cancel the contract that we have, or how does it work? Or
Let me ask you a question. If you sign a 3-year gym membership and then tomorrow you decide you just want to eat sugar and get diabetes, can you cancel your 3-year gym membership?
Yeah.
No. Not without penalties. Raphael, understand the word contract. Contract. If you sign a non-disclosure agreement with your company and you go and blab all their secrets, you're going to get sued. It's a contract. You cannot get out of a contract.
So for how long you have the contract?
Whatever time we put on it.
And usually what is the length?
Whatever you put on it. It's negotiable, right? It depends. But see, Raphael, word of caution again, you don't like this, but you've got to stop not liking things and you've got to accept them at face value because you will get questions wrong if you don't like it. It's not about whether you like it or not. It's not whether you think it's fair. It's not any of that. Is it a contract? Did you sign it? We're getting paid. Yeah, point blank period. Raphael, you and I signed an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. And 2 days after we sign it, your brother decides he wants to buy your house. Raphael, you've got to pay me. It is what it is. I didn't sell your house. You sold your house. You've still got to pay me. That's how it works. What you got, Beverly?
What happens if the contract, like the terms of the contract have expired? Say it's 30 days or whatever. And then you do have a buyer that is, that comes from that agent, and it basically goes under contract after your agency agreement has expired. Then what?
Hang tight. We'll talk about it. There is something in the contract for that. So let me give you the visual now. And then I'm going to actually show you one of these listing agreements. Because like I said, I find this is the best order to kind of teach this to you. So the open listing agreement, I told you, there are multiple firms hired. Okay. And the seller says, find me a buyer. And only the one who actually brings the buyer, see that word, selling agent, brings the buyer, is entitled to compensation. The rest of them would get nothing. However, as we said, the seller can find their own buyer and pay no brokers nothing. They can do for sale by owner, all the while trying to see if all these other brokers can attempt to bring them a buyer. As you would imagine, this is the least common because you could be doing a lot of work trying to find a buyer and ultimately make nothing, which most people are not going to sign up for. And then the exclusive agency, one brokerage firm hired. Okay, that's the exclusive piece of it. There's just the seller and the one firm. But in the exclusive agency, the seller still has the right to find their own buyer. And if they find their own buyer, in other words, sell it for sale by owner, find their own buyer, they do not have to pay the broker anything. But I'm telling you, if the buyer comes from anywhere other than the seller directly, the brokers get paid because this is typically done the normal way. The seller will advertise the home in the MLS, and so even if a cooperating firm brings the buyer, that's through the firm's marketing efforts, and both brokers are going to get paid. So only one firm. If any of the marketing efforts from the broker result in the buyer coming, brokers get paid. But if the seller sells it themselves, they don't have to pay any brokers, nothing. And then the last one, and you've got to be careful because they both have that word exclusive in it, folks, but they are very, very different from a test question point of view on how these are going to be interpreted or what they mean for when compensation is owed. And so the last one was that exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Now, folks, this one is the most common one. And so the question I always get, kind of stemming from what Raphael said, folks, all the time when I teach this, students are like, well, why would a seller pick this one over the other ones? You think we tell the sellers the other two even exist? Don't you look at me that way? That's not common practice. If they want to talk about it, we can talk about it, but this is the most common. This is how it works. Folks, it is what it is. Like I said, you can't answer questions with your emotions because right now you're the consumer. But you're working to be the broker. And you've got to understand that the law is law. Contract law is interpreted as contract law. When we formed a contract, it is what it is. If you didn't like it, don't sign it. But once you've signed it, you've bound yourself to it. And so this one, right, one firm, and it does not matter where the buyer comes from, folks. And I mean, it does not matter. As I said, Raphael's brother wants to buy the house. He still owes me money. Raphael's best friend wants to buy the house. He still owes me money. Raphael clones himself in his basement and his clone buys the house. He still owes me money. It does not matter where this buyer comes from. I'm still getting paid. So we are in the agency contracts section and we just explain these different types of listing agreements. So I'm going to show you one, and I'm going to focus on 2023 version. Why? Because, yet again, I don't want you to get so caught up with any of the changes. And the new one kind of has some language that I think could confuse you more than it should. Let me pull this up here. Just a second. So here is the one that we're currently looking at on the screen, the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. The one that we said was the most common. And so you can see right here at the top, that's exactly what it is named, the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. And so some very interesting language that we're going to go over. Now, am I going to read this thing to you verbatim? No, but I am going to point out a couple of very important aspects here because they're what I would consider the most testable. So this exclusive right to sell listing agreement is entered into between blank as seller of the property described below and blank as listing firm. So there's where I told you earlier in our agency discussions that you've got to be thinking about the parties. And so it's as plain as day, the seller and the firm are the parties to this. Now, when I told you about subagency, here's what it says. The individual agent who signs this agreement shall, on behalf of the firm, be primarily responsible for ensuring that the firm's duties hereunder are fulfilled. However, it is understood and agreed that other agents of the firm may be assigned to fulfill such duties if deemed appropriate by the firm. For the purpose of this agreement, the term firm, as the context may require, shall be deemed to include the individual agent who signs this agreement and any other agent of the firm. All the agents, right? That's what we kind of get into. Everybody who works for the firm is a sub-agent. And that means we automatically all have a relationship to this person when they sign it, even if you've never met them. Now, this note right here is not super consequential for pre-licensing. What it talks about is making sure that the appropriate parties sign this. Meaning, if you're inheriting the property, are you the rightful heir? Is it an entity? Are you a signatory authority? Things of that nature. So here's where it gets into some of the actual language of what this listing agreement between the seller and firm is doing. In consideration for firm services and efforts to find a buyer for the property, the firm is hereby granted the, here's the term again, exclusive right to sell the property on the terms and conditions set forth in this agreement. Now, remember when we were talking about the working of the real estate agent's disclosure, that is always step one. And then forming an agency relationship is step two. And so here's what this little kind of disclaimer says. Seller represents that as of the effective date, the seller is not or will not be, if the property is currently listed, a party to a listing agreement with any other real estate firm regarding the property. Seller also represents that seller has received a copy of the working of the real estate agent's disclosure and has reviewed it with the firm. So we're just checking to make sure you're not working with anybody else before you sign this, and or you've already received the working of the real estate agent's disclosure. Because, as I said, this is exclusive. So you can't get in a relationship with us if you're in a relationship with somebody else, because then it's not exclusive anymore. So the term of this agreement, Raphael asked earlier, well, how long is the agreement for? And I said, whatever you set it for. Here's where we talk about it. The term of this agreement shall begin on its effective date and shall end at 11:59 p.m. on its expiration date. Now, there are two different options for the effective date on this, and I'll try to explain a couple pieces here. This agreement shall become effective, and the seller and the firm's respective rights and obligations under this agreement shall commence as follows. Most common, this one, the effective date shall be the date that this agreement has been signed by both the seller and the firm. That's the most common. However, there is also this option. The property is currently listed for sale exclusively with another real estate firm. Seller represents that the current listing agreement expires on whatever date. The effective date of this agreement shall commence immediately upon the expiration of the current listing agreement. Now, we're going to talk about solicitation laws in a little bit, folks. But what you have to understand is we are not allowed to steal business from other brokers. More specifically, it could be two different things. It's what we call tortious interference of a contract, which is a civil law that we could be sued for. But when you become a realtor, you are bound by a code of ethics, and an article, specifically 16 mentioned here, within that code of ethics state that we can't try to solicit business from other brokers, lest we be in trouble. And so if somebody doesn't like their broker, we could sign one of these with that person to commence once their relationship ends, but not before. So here is the expiration date. This agreement shall terminate at 11:59 p.m. on whatever date. Now, all written agency agreements in North Carolina have to have a definite termination date. You cannot leave it open-ended. You cannot put infinity. You can't put anything crazy like that. Have to have a definite termination date. If you want to know what you put in there, it's whatever you and the seller agree to. If you put 2 years, the seller is going to say, what do you suck at your job? Why do you need 2 years to sell my house? If you put 6 days, you're not giving yourself enough time to sell it. So you've got to be able to justify whatever date we put in here. In a normal market or a hot market, I'd say 3 months would be adequate. In a slower market, 6 months maybe. It's whatever you agree to. And remember what we said, if that date and time hits, this agency agreement automatically ends. It's got this self-destruct, right? The expiration date. If you haven't done your job and that date and time hits, it's dead. Dunsies. No mas. What you got, Cheyenne?
Are there similar contracts as far as like amount of time to get some like the property management?
Yeah, property management agreements.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, Cheyenne, and we'll get into this later, all written agency agreements in North Carolina have to have 4 things always. And one of those things I just mentioned was a definite expiration date. However, when we get into property management agreements, they are unique because they do have to have a definite expiration date, but they are allowed to have an automatic renewal because of the nature of property management. But these cannot automatically renew. Bill says, do firms have minimum expiration requirements as a general rule? No. I mean, some firms may give you guidance on what they think would be, an adequate period of time, but there's no real typical. I mean, it depends on the property and how fast we think we could sell it. A lot of different things. Yeah, Lena, you have, if you scroll down in the bottom of your LMS, your learning management system, there is a section titled NCAR Documents, and there is a link to a Google Drive, and all of them are in there. And as I said, that one has the 2023 versions. Why? Because I don't want you to get confused by the 2024 versions, because none of the test questions have been rewritten yet. You see what I'm talking about? Are you looking at it?
Yeah, I just found it when you said that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the next piece is the property. It says the property that is the subject of this agreement shall include all the real estate described below with all appurtenances thereto. There's some throwback words, including all the improvements located thereon and the fixtures and personal property listed in paragraphs 3 and 4 below. These are all words we introduced in the basic real estate concepts and appurtenances and encumbrances section. So they should sound pretty familiar. Now, the street address, as we said, is the informal reference, but you will realize that we go on and we refer to the lot and block as well. In other words, reference to a recorded plat, also called the lot and block method. And we also put the reference to a recorded deed. Now, folks, one word of caution. There are certain things that are never going to be on a listing agreement. You've got to think about timing. And this is just another place that students will screw up on the test, and it just always stands out to me. What we're not going to have on a listing agreement is square footage. We're not going to have property boundaries. We're not going to have surveys. We're not going to have any of that, because this is basically forming the relationship to market their property. We sometimes can't do all these things, until we actually have this relationship. So be very cautious. All this form really does is outlines a relationship between the seller and the firm and their obligations to each other. There's not going to be crazy specific things about the house on here in most cases. But we do have the legal description. And so the other word of caution is, remember, certain agency contracts are property specific. Like this one. Why does that matter? What did I tell you? Why does this matter that this is property specific?
So you don't accidentally sell a different property with the same address or similar address?
It could be that. We want to make sure that we clearly understand what we're listing and what the buyer's getting, but there's another reason why it's very important to understand that it's property specific. Think about the way that these... go ahead. Say it.
If the property is destroyed.
There you go. Thank you, Paige. If the property is destroyed, that would kill this listing agreement because it is property specific. Buyer agency agreements, you'll find in a minute, are not property specific. They're very general in nature. So your the buyer agency agreement, not property specific. Property management and listing agreements are both very specific. And so if the property gets destroyed or taken by eminent domain or foreclosed or something, that would kill this agency agreement. Now, this next section here, we've talked about earlier in the slides, and I told you it was going to make a comeback when we got into certain pieces. Now, I'm going to loosely talk about it here, but, we'll talk about it even more later. I told you the general rule of thumb for this class is if it's nailed, screwed, glued, or buried, it's considered a fixture. Nailed, screwed, glued, or buried, it's considered a fixture. In the real world, it's way more specific than that. And so this list says, well, hey, if it's in the house at the time of listing it, and it's on this list, it's a fixture. And so if you don't want these things that are considered fixtures to stay, I told you, what do we need to do? Clearly name them in the contract as things that are not going to stay. But this is just having the discussion with the seller. Where does it really matter is on the contract between the buyer and seller, not the listing firm and the seller. And so it goes on to say, and I'm not going to read all of it, the parties should not assume that an item will or will not be included in the sale based on an oral or written statement or understanding that is not a part of the sales contract. Buyer and seller should be specific when negotiating what items will be included in or excluded from the sale. And all these items include smart versions and will be transferred to the buyer free of liens. And it includes things like alarm systems, smoke detectors, antennas, basketball goals, trees, landscaping, storage sheds, a lot of different things. And so if it was something that was leased and not owned, you may want to put it in here because of the UCC. What is UCC? What does UCC stand for? Who remembers? There you go, Brad. The Uniform Commercial Code. Remember, there are certain things that you may have a creditor, may have a security agreement against. And so you may not own it yet because you're making these payments. And so it may be considered lease not owned and it may need to be paid off. Other things that could pop up in there, leased gas tanks that you'll never own or leased satellites or other equipment. So if it's not something that's going to be paid off, it's not something that's going to be owned, we need to name that here. But the things that are fixtures by default are going to stay. So if you want to sever them from the property, you would have to name them. Blank is not going to stay. And this also has to be named, as I said, in the sales contract. It is more important in the sales contract than it is here. And then same thing too, personal property. If the seller is okay with leaving personal property, name that here. And yet again, it needs to make it in the sales contract. Home warranty, not consequential for this. That's just whether or not the seller wants to offer one. This is the next big piece. Okay. Provision 6 right here. Listing price. Seller lists the property at a price of, let me just throw some numbers in here. I don't know why it's green, but we'll roll with it. At $400,000. And then, of course, they would decide what type of terms would be acceptable. Are they okay with cash, FHA, VA, USDA, conventional? And so here's the interesting language here, and I got to give you a couple pieces of insight. It says, seller agrees to sell the property for the listing price or for any other price or on any other terms acceptable to the seller. So he agrees to sell the property, or she, right here, she agrees to sell the property at list price or for any other price or any other terms acceptable to the seller. Well, folks, how would we know if any other terms were acceptable to the seller other than the list price? Well, yeah. Ultimately, yeah, we're on the right track. Ask them, right? Ask them. Because if we're the listing agent and we said, okay, well, the seller says they'll sell it for $400,000 and an offer comes in for $380,000 and we look at the seller and we say, would you take this? And they say, yeah, then that has become acceptable to the seller because they've stated it is. The only way to know if anything other than list price is acceptable to the seller is to confirm that it's acceptable to the seller. That's it. Now, here's the compensation side of things. And as I said, there is different versions of these forms out there. So if you stumble upon them, don't panic. There's just some extra language added in that I don't want you to see because it's not going to be on your test. So I'm just warning you about that. What you got, Raphael?
Like an example you just gave, you had a 400, they came with an offer 380, then you asked, okay, they say yes. Can they go back and work? Like, oh, you know what? I'm thinking about it, and no, 380 is not right.
I mean, if I've got written evidence that they said it was acceptable, could I technically force them to pay a commission? Probably. Would I probably do that as their agent? No. But you've got to understand these literal interpretations. If they stated it was acceptable, You know, and I want you to understand something too, folks. You're going to see it in a second. The language is going to say, if we procure a ready, willing, and able buyer at terms acceptable to the seller, we've earned our commission. But don't think that that's really what we're looking for. We're not looking for that bait and switch where like we get this offer and then we're going to disappear and we're going to collect our money. We don't get paid till closing. The only time that we would enforce the ready, willing, and able thing is if they decided not to sell. If we did all the work, we did that. Think of it this way, folks. If you take your car to a mechanic and they do $1,000 worth of work, you can't say, well, no, I'm not paying you for it. After the work has been done, you owe them money. Is everybody with me? That's what we're saying. If we've done the job that we were hired to do and you try to not sell it or, pay it, we got a problem.